DECAP.
I'm going to show you guys a bunch of ways to make melodies sound more interesting. Let's dive into Ableton. Let's go to Drums That Knock Volume 7. Let's use this. Now let's get a melody loop. We're going to get a melody loop from Drums That Knock 7. Here we go. One technique to making a loop more interesting is throwing it off the grid. You can use track delay here on the right, throw it off the grid. Let's slow the whole beat down a little bit too. And I'm going to change the warp on the drums. So you hear the difference, not off the grid. And then I'm going to set it 29 milliseconds forward here on the right. See how that just gives it more bounce? So another thing you can do is change the warp mode. Or if you stay on beats mode, if you change the forward arrow, you can turn this down and get some cool effects too. Now I'm playing with the transients on the warp mode. From there, you can add effects to it. So like I could add a reverb to that. I'm not just using a loop now, I'm freaking it. So I took something directly from my drum kit and I just changed it by doing a couple little tweaks. So that's one thing you can do to make your melodies more interesting. Another thing, I mean, a lot of you guys know about this. There's this little plugin by Cable Guys called Halftime. You can just take whatever melody you have and just flip it into something different. Take some of the lows out. So we just made something totally different with one plugin and just adjusted a little bit of the dry wet. Another plugin that I really like for this kind of thing is something like Looperator. I don't know if you guys heard of this, but this plugin lets you just go crazy chopping a sample. I always start with initialized preset, so just blank. Under slice, you can just use this to rearrange the sample. I just play around with it. See, we just switched it up. There you go. So that's another way to make your melody more interesting. What is the other one? Effect tricks. It's very simple. There you go. Play around with effect tricks, Looperator. Another one is glitch 2. Ooh. You guys get the idea. Another thing I talk a lot about is adding grit to it. So I'm gonna use a plugin by Baby Audio called Super VHS. By the way, I'm not sponsored by any of these guys. This is just stuff that I personally like to use. And I just wanna spread the knowledge because they put out great plugins and I just wanna support it. Gritty it up. I mean, that sounds crazy already. If you're in Ableton, another thing you can do is just highlight your melody. As long as you have it warped, you can just turn the transpose up or down. That's down 4 semitones. Now let's bring it up. So we just grabbed 2 loops, literally 2 loops from Drums That Knock Volume 7, and we got a banger. And it became your own because you're doing effects to it. It's not just the regular sample in the kit. Not that there's anything wrong with using loops, but even just these little tweaks, it makes it your own. Now that you pitched it, it sounds so different. In FL, you can do that too. You can just turn the transpose knob at the top. But say you're in another DAW. There's a plugin by Waves called Sound Shifter. This is another way you can just freak the melody into different keys. So all I have to do is change the semitones. can change the sense too. One thing I'll say about Sound Shifter is it's super CPU intensive, so if you use a lot of it, it definitely weighs on your CPU. Another thing you could do, let's get a MIDI from Drums That Knock Volume 7. I just loaded up the MIDI from that melody, so it's those exact chords. So I played those chords. How I came up with the flute and the kit, I just loaded up an arpeggiator. Another thing to make melodies more interesting is if you load up an arpeggiator device in Ableton, you can just mess with the style, mess with the rate, mess with the gate, repeats, all that to come up with arpeggiated melodies. So say you have these chords. I'm gonna duplicate the channel. Now I'm gonna add arpeggiator to another one. I'm gonna get a different sound on the second one. Let's get a flute. Another way to make melodies more interesting is you can reverse the MIDI. What you want to do is take your chords and move them one section over. So however long that is, move it one over. Then you want to highlight that section and what's before it. Hit Command J, double click it, and you want to highlight all the MIDI. Take this marker here on the right and just flip it. What that did was reverse all the MIDI. And then you're going to erase all this at the end here. And if you listen to it, it's going to play the MIDI backwards. I mean, actually, that sounds dope alone. Like, I actually like how that sounds. So you could just keep it that way, but it's not gonna always work. Like in this case, we might have to adjust it a little bit. Just gonna go and freeze it, flatten it, and then we wanna reverse this. If you just hit R, it reverses it, or you can just hit the reverse button here on the bottom. So now check this out. So that's another way to make your melodies more interesting. We just flipped the MIDI, froze it, flattened it, and reversed it. You got this melody going, and now you can just build off of that. We're gonna cut some of the lows. Another thing you can sidechain is you can use an auto pan plugin. It's just a stock Ableton plugin. You want to set the amount to 100, select the note for the LFO. So it's going from ear to ear, but if you change the phase to 360, ear to ear, but this is just ducking volume. So now what you want to do is you want to change the offset till it sounds good. So that's on time. Then you can change the shape of the oscillator. And then you can just keep adjusting the offset. And then you can play with the shape more. So those are just some things you can do to make your melody more interesting. Oh, another thing, you can play with the amount. So it's not the full effect. I like AutoPan for that. Another thing you can do, just to do it quickly, I just bought this Kickstart plugin, Nicky Romero. It's just a quick sidechain. And here's your amount knob. You can change where the curve hits. You can select all these different curves. That is how to make your melodies more interesting. DECAP.